I'm Al McFarlane. Welcome to the Conversation with Al McFarlane. Today is Friday, July 12th, 2024. Friday's the Healing Circle, and we're glad to be here with our colleagues and uh, one of the luminaries in the healing world, Dr. Oliver Williams. Our leader, Dr. B, is not with us today. She might drop in. She's at a conference. I know that. And if she gets a minute, she'll step out of the conference, step into the show. But we are in good hands just by being together here, as we always are. Let me say first that we are sponsored by and we appreciate the support of Build Wealth and 9,000 Equities. Build Wealth and 9,000 Equities, helping 9,000 Black families own a home. Information at 9000equities.com. And the Build Wealth people are located over in the Thor building on Plymouth and Penn. We call it the Thor building. The formal name of it is the Regional Acceleration Center. And one of the features of that building is the Minnesota African American History Museum. I mean, not saying that name exactly right. We'll correct it as we go along because we're going to be talking to the curator of the exhibit that is currently being presented at the History Museum. But first, let me invite Dr. Oliver Williams on the screen. Doc, good to see you. How you doing? How you enjoying retired life?
Well, it's still I'm still getting used to it, so I have to figure out it in phases. But at this point, it's pretty good. Sonia and I are going to be going to the Dominican Republic to do some training.
Wow.
So
Oh,
yeah, so that's going to be interesting. We
that,
tried to go when we got married to spend our honeymoon there,
uh-huh.
but they had elections and they said it was a little challenging. So we've been married for 38 years. So this is our first trip to the Dominican Republic.
Oh,
My
good.
brother-in-law goes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
This has been my first
Oh,
trip.
that's special. That's wonderful. Listen, great. You deserve it, and you're going to have a good time. You'll be bringing light to the people that you connect with there. Well, let's do this. Dr. B normally starts us off with sort of instruction protocol, and I'm going to ask you to do that today to get us into our program.
Okay. Well, I won't do it as well as Dr. B, but there's some really important elements to the way that we do it. And one of the things that she talks about is the fact that we use a talking stick. It's sort of an African tradition and ways that people learn how to share discussions. And interesting, the African American Museum in Detroit, Michigan is really interesting to me because they have a building that's structured in a way that it was constructed in Africa, and particularly in one country. And and they have it constructed the way that you can speak, you can hear entirely the other side of the room.
Mm.
The building is constructed. But what I like about what Dr. B discusses is the fact that we have the opportunity to share dialogue and share the conversation, and we do it through the talking stick.
Mm-hmm.
And we hand the talking stick back to one another. And the theme associated with it is the fact that we share power.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that it's more egalitarian in the way that you do it, and that there's things that we have to be thoughtful about. One is the fact that as we have these conversations, one of the things that we do is we have to recognize that we have to value the ancestors, but we value the ancestors too because they're closest to God.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the other thing is that we share things among ourselves, and we oftentimes people do and have these conversations in a circle. So there's a more egalitarian, and that it's not a situation where one person is more powerful than the other person, but they ask for the talking stick to be able to share their points of view and to have conversations, and they share it with each other. So what we want to do is to hear what somebody has to say. We pass the talking stick. But if we have something to say, we ask for the talking stick.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what we'll be doing today as we have this conversation. And with that, Brother Al, I'm going to pass the talking stick to you.
Well, thank you, Dr. Oliver Williams. So today we have the fortune and the honor of connecting with Brother James Curry. He's curated a phenomenal exhibit in the gallery up at the Thor Building. Again, I call it the Thor Building. It's the Regional Acceleration Center. The show, the exhibit is called SoulForce. You can put the image up there. SoulForce, the movements of memory. It opened in June and it runs through August 3rd. You don't want to miss this. It's a powerful collection of images and articles, news pieces, and just being in a place that has collected and assembled these news stories and magazine articles and artifacts and photographs that show our people and our history right here in that neighborhood, Plymouth and Penn in particular, Plymouth Avenue, but all of Minneapolis and St. Paul. It's wonderful to have that and to have people like James Curry, who both individually and as a representative of his family have been power players in the development of community, of culture, of our identity in the community. Brother James Curry, welcome to the conversation. How you doing?
Great. Thank you so much for that really, really honorable introduction. I hope I live up to it.
Well, I know that you will because your family does that. The Currys, do that without thinking. That's who they are. You know who you are.
Thank you.
So listen. Tell us about the exhibit first. Talk about that and invite people to come, and then we'll ask some questions later. So,
sure.
Handing the talking stick back to you.
Thank you, sir. So this was courtesy of the Minnesota African American Heritage Museum and Gallery Fellowship Program. I sent a proposal along with, I'm sure, a myriad of other candidates and was awarded based on that proposal, which was an idea of taking a look at the intersectionality of red, brown, and black power movements, social movements, people power movements that had roots here in the North Side. And, as Al mentioned, it specifically sort of highlights this community, this 3 mile radius, which I'm speaking to you from now. That proposal got some traction, and then I had to follow up and do a deep dive. I took on a couple advisors. The inspiration really came from a red, brown, and black power presentation or Zoom presentation that was done at the Eastside Freedom Library by Dr. Jimmy Patino. And I had seen it maybe in 2020 and was inspired by it and didn't really realize the connection and the crossover and solidarity that there was. So I kind of cold called Jimmy and got together with Dr. Patino and used him as a consultant along with Valerie Martinez. I really had no connection directly to the American Indian movement nor the community, I'm sad to say. But she was a daughter of the movement, and I was able to get interviews with Frank Pero and Mike Forsha. And if you don't know who Mike is, he's the brother that pulled down the Columbus statue right after George Floyd. Mary Lagarde, and I went and spoke to her father, Joe Lagarde. So it was really fruitful to finally, I have to also give a shout out to the U of M, the Anderson Library, who housed the American Indian Interpretive Center's photos. So in a way, it was a deep dive academically. I'm an educator, but I didn't want to purport to be a historian per se. But I'm going through the articles. I'm going through the era. I'm absorbing media and content, and just sort of leaning into the visual aspects. I'm a filmmaker, or I make my living as an editor, and I think I gravitated to the visuals and the photos. So, that's what is really represented here, is kind of a mosaic or kind of a collage of that kind of snapshot of the community. Sorry. Do you mind? So I'll hand it back to you.
Okay, no, that's great. That's great. And Dr. Oliver,
Mhm.
uh, there we go. There we go. Let's the three of us reflect on the importance of history, of recording, remembering, and elevating, preserving our story.
Yeah.
Let me give my reflection, two reflections. Number one
Mhm.
is that I remember maybe a speech by Honorable Louis Farrakhan. I can't remember the details of the speech or the when and the where, but he talked so dramatically, as he always does as a teacher. And he talked about people being uh, moved because they are not rooted like dust. And he said, and his doing that of just the art of blowing the dust away made us realize how both impermanent we are, but how sometimes without institutions around which we create structure,
Right.
and longevity, we therefore, in the eyes of history, seem inconsequential. It's
Mhm.
as if we didn't exist. That's one story. Second story for me is that when I was visiting a cousin in London, we took a open bus tour downtown, and
Mhm.
I just can't get over the fact that on every other corner there was a statue. Lord this, Duke that, the Earl of this, Count that, the King, the Queen, the Prince. And so I said, no wonder these white people think that they own the world, because they remind themselves of their near divinity every day, all day.
Right.
So, and they refuse, however, to recognize us. Uh, and so those are my impressions. Dr. Williams, what do you think?
I agree with you 100%. I think about what the current conservative um, group, uh, for lack of a better word, is doing with regard to cutting out our history,
Hmm.
and then thinking that they have justifications in doing that, and it made me think about. I wonder what it must have been like for uh, people of color who had been here for a long time.
Hmm.
And what they did was they cut out the history and pretended like it didn't exist. And they did it historically for one reason, but currently they're doing it because they felt bad,
Hmm.
and it felt like it helped them to uh,
Mhm.
feel diminished in some way, rather than there being the truth of what existed, who existed, and how it frames the way that we understand things. I think about, I told you Sonia and I have been married for 38 years this year,
Hmm.
and we've been together for more than 40. And I remember, on our journey together, a lot of visits to the Caribbean and to Puerto Rico, and like I mentioned, we're going to go to the Dominican Republic, and I went to Brazil with the U a few years ago, and then going to Africa and seeing ourselves in all the places that we've been, and that I mean, so we were talking about bomba. Bomba is a music and it's a dance.
Hmm.
It's historic to a lot of people may not know it, but it's historic to Puerto Rico, but it's based on African traditions. When you hear drums and when you hear the music, when you hear um, uh, different types of ways of people expressing themselves artistically, Black people are there, and a lot of times we don't get the impression that they are, but they're there, and they've historically been there. And so that's why, when I go to Puerto Rico, there are ways that I can see myself there, even though I grew up in Detroit. And but I see myself in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic and in Brazil and different parts of Africa. I saw this thing on Facebook And there's a brother asking people in England, uh, uh, what's the poorest country that you can think of in the world? And the comment that people made, I thought was interesting, is that they said collectively said Africa. Africa is a continent. It's not a country.
Mhm.
And but they said, Africa, and there are two African men that were listening to what was going on, and they shook their head no. But then what they did was they showed the vision. It's kind of like what they did when I was a kid with regard to Tarzan. You see one type of person that was blatantly everybody who was in Africa, rather than showing what Africa looks like and going to different countries and seeing how fabulous it is, and and how beautiful it is, and it helps to shape how we think of Africa, but how we think of ourselves. We got to reframe that in some way. So as I think about this, I think this exhibit, James, that you are developing is real important because it helps to bring the truth of who we are to ourselves, and that's something that I think Trump lacks is an understanding of who we are and an exclusion. And it's kind of like a baseball. Who I remember, I look at the young women that are gymnasts now. It
Mhm.
used to be that you didn't see black gymnasts.
Hmm.
Mhm.
You used to. I remember when I was in school, they said black people didn't run long distances. We were only good for sprints, and the images about what we're supposed to do and what we weren't supposed to do, or the fact that you can have white baseball leagues without black people contributing and saying that that's the realm about the way that we need to look at the world of rather than trying to understand the expansiveness of what we do and how we can contribute to something. We need to understand ourselves better. And
Yep.
so that's the way I think about it. So, James, I had a question for you though. Is your family from Minnesota?
Yeah, they are. They hail from, in the 1800s, Harrisonburg, Virginia,
Okay.
at least the paternal line. Actually, in the maternal, now that I take it.
Okay. I was wondering.
Although I think there might be, are you trying to connect me to Dell and Steph? Because I'm pretty
No,
sure.
I'm
Oh,
trying to connect you to the Currys in my family.
oh, okay.
My grandfather was a Curry in McCormick, South Carolina.
Ah,
And my dad grew up in Anderson, South Carolina.
okay.
So I'm trying to figure out whether we have some connection with each other.
That's what Ancestry is for, in that cotton swipe.
That's right. African ancestry in particular.
Right.
But I did ancestry.com and found out that I'm 40% Nigerian.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, yeah. And then other parts of Africa and then
Yeah.
a little bit out of Europe. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Have you done the DNA, James?
I have not.
Okay.
And I know that there's an African one
Mm.
specifically, which is the most intriguing.
Right.
African ancestry. Yeah.
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 But yeah, it's on my bucket
It
list.
was. I've done it, and I've done it with. I started with African ancestry, then I also did 23andMe, and then I
Yeah.
also did Ancestry. So I've done three,
Yeah.
and so it's interesting approaches and analyses. But let me do this, James. Would you walk us through the exhibit and kind of give us a guided tour, and take your time to stretch out, and. When people come there, you're at 1256 Penn Avenue North, I believe is the address, right?
Is that right,
And
Coventry? 1256? Yes, it is. You're
yeah,
right.
and say hi to Coventry. She's one of my favorite people in the world. And Coventry, thank you so much for uh, helping make this happen. Good to see you.
All right. Yeah. So it's a little bit nonlinear. You could approach it with panels and take it panel by panel. So with that in mind, it does start with sort of a description, um, which is a conceit of this idea of besides the political activism and the movements that we recall, as in civil rights, this is more about the post-civil rights era. In other words, after the death of MLK, RFK, Fred Hampton, Malcolm, JFK, Poor People's Campaign, just this sort of disillusionment that set in post-civil rights. And I wanted to introduce color and a little immersion, so I include, they're muted now, but some of these Eyes on the Prize bits, also some from that era, as well as some KSTP footage of the actual Plymouth Rebellion in 66 and 67 in interviews on the street. So it's kind of immersive that way. Right? It's a bit scattershot, but I didn't mind the idea of not only text and photos, but to have audio and visuals, as well as the panels. There's a prologue, which sets the table about us before Minnesota was even a state, what was going down between basically 100 years ago. And some, a smattering of highs and lows and sort of our narrative. Again, not comprehensive, but just more of a snapshot. Mm-hmm. There's a shout out to the Brown movement, Chicano. In the 60s, Chicanos were living with the indigenous and African Americans here in the North Side, and made inroads just as much as the Black and indigenous, but in a different kind of narrative that wasn't always supplemented with a lot of stories in the media, photos, or even challenges, mostly because, granted, there were challenges, but they were interested in the same things we were, autonomy, independence, self-determination, and all the benefits of citizenship. So we moved from that to collaboration, which is part of the intersectionality. I did use some circles to help indicate indigo for the Black Power movement, red and orange for American Indian, and as well as the Chicano movement. And then let's see, where do we go?
You could zoom in on.
Oh, okay.
Zoom in on each of the panels that you go through, just so we could get a sense
Gotcha.
of what's there.
Gotcha.
And maybe pick one thing to talk about in each one item, but go real close, as close as you can, so that we can see it.
All right, and I'll figure out how to do that. I'm supposed to be a filmmaker, and I'm struggling. So we may as well just, let's see, and then everything's reversed. A lot of people didn't know that MLK was here and spoke in '67 at the U of M. I've acquired footage. It's really public footage, but I put together not only the existing clips in the chronological order, but did the best that I could to also make a transcript of his speech, because it lives in bits and pieces on the U of M site, as well as PBS tried to piece it together, but or they did the best they could. But that's one. There's some curries, by the way. There's Mom. I couldn't help but sneak in my family because they're part of the prologue.
Well, go back. Don't go yet. Let's talk about Mom, right? So
okay.
Zoom in on that photograph. Who's in it? And
right.
Let's talk about the
Sure.
occasion and the family and where that is in the flow of legacy and lineage.
Well, thanks for that, Al. Yeah, so Mom and Dad met at Dreamland. If anybody's familiar with Dreamland on the south side of Minneapolis, a interracial couple in the 50s. My dad returned from Korea. She was born in Wayzata. She may look even mixed here because of the filtering, but an Irish German extraction. And
your dad's Irish German, or your mom?
My mom.
Okay.
My dad's African American with a little bit of. I think his dad referred to them as smoked Irish.
Okay.
If you've heard the term. So there's some Irish blood in there.
Now, your mom doesn't look white. Is she white? Is your mom white?
Yeah, she's Irish and German
All right.
and
Okay.
English. And
So
then,
does this question come up of whether your mom is white or not? Because she doesn't, and maybe it's the paper it's on, maybe it's the whatever. But
right.
if I had to look from here, I'd say light-skinned black woman. I wouldn't say white.
Sure.
Does that come up in the course of family discussions or neighborhood discussions or whatever?
It doesn't, but
Okay.
there might be some in the interracial relationship, some proximity effect
Okay. Okay.
that
Okay.
turns her into a light-skinned black woman.
James, are you in that picture?
I'm not. I wasn't even born, which is
Okay.
as in the prologue.
Okay.
And then we know about Dred Scott.
Yeah.
All right. I discussed a little bit about the Brown Chicano movement, including the ethnic studies program at the U of M.
Mhm.
They fought for, just like Elder Mahmoud did for our Black ethnic studies.
Mhm.
There are some didactics here, these little sidebars that zoom in on certain pictures and lay out a little more information about, in this case, martyrs of the movement that were killed in Boulder, Colorado, known as Los Cis, as in six. Let's see, collaboration. We've got Spike, who's getting a street named after himself.
Mhm. Next Tuesday.
Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah. And the way,
Mhm.
really this collaboration here, again, at Penn and Plymouth, in response to police brutality, economic oppression, and unity that formed, that took the form of the way, which is a place that I think of fondly, because I didn't ever go into it. I was born in Brooklyn Park, but my mom was like, we should take you to the way as a little boy. And she knew that it was a place for learning cultural heritage and pride, and as well as many other things. And then we got Prince that comes out of that. I think Prince is probably in the next one. Let's see. Well, we've got Prince and Jimmy Jam, as well as the Time, and all the luminaries of the Minneapolis sound, really sort of gestating from, I think, the Way Community Center. It's really a place of I hold special in my heart, and I think is sort of seminal to our community. All right.
Do you have Roy Wilkins in any of the things that you have?
Maybe back at the prologue, but again, this is trying to be a little post-civil rights.
Okay.
Intentionally.
Mhm.
It's an era clouded in, or not clouded in, but thought of as disillusionment, the loss of Vietnam War, Nixon resigning, Watergate, assassinations galore. So I was a little more interested in that part of the narrative.
Okay.
And then we go to.
Let me stop you for a
sure.
second and jump in and just sit with Spike. Show some more pictures of Spike. That's Spike is a
There
big
he is in
deal.
the dashiki.
Hmm. And for those who don't know, Spike Moss is like, I call him like the general, like the commander in chief of the movement. He's had that kind of attitude, that leadership. He's been phenomenal. And as you mentioned, Brother Curry, this week coming up Tuesday at 11 o'clock, the street, Plymouth Avenue, which is where you guys are on your east-west side, is going to be named Spike Moss Way. And the significance is that the ceremony is going to be held next to and in front of the 4th Precinct Police Station. The 4th Precinct is built on the ground that housed the youth-serving community agency called The Way. And Spike was the youth leader, youth organizer, emerged as president of The Way over time, and continued that role of service and leadership, even though we lost control of The Way, and that under the leadership of, I think, Police Chief Tony Bouza and the politicians around him, they wanted to make a statement to Black people by bulldozing the image and the idea of Black liberation, and placing on top of it the the police station. Just think of the symbology. Look, Dr. Williams, what is the symbology of that? What does that tell the psyche of a people? If you had something that you thought was a place for liberation and freedom, but somebody else from outside the community smacked you down and put a police station where your freedom was, what does that tell us as a community? Dr. Williams, pass
No,
this talk to you real quick.
yeah, no, you don't. That's what it says to me, is the fact that you don't have the power that you think you have. We hold the power,
Yeah.
and we'll do what do with you what we choose to do.
Yeah.
And that's why you have to continue to push. And that's I that's why I respect Joe Biden, is the fact that he keeps trying to send a message out. It's interesting to me. I'm diverting, but the discussion about the debate, I listened to that debate. He was all over Trump.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course, maybe he could have had a different um, positioning of self, but he won the debate.
Mm-hmm.
And nobody's talking about the fact that Trump lied and he in a bunch of inaccuracies, and he doesn't care about most human beings. He cares about himself. So anyway, I don't know whether I answered the question now, but
No,
I
that's
think
on point. On point. Let me share this with you as well right now. You haven't seen this yet, James, but what we're doing in our paper coming up Monday
Oh, nice.
is a tribute. We're going to do 3 weeks of tribute to Spike Moss, and you can
That's beautiful.
scroll it down a little bit, Cooper, so we can see the full page. And we're talking about Plymouth Avenue being renamed. And what we did is went through our archive and found stories from as early as 2002. If you pull in on the first story there, Cooper, go large and to the left column, and it says, okay, and then scroll down a little bit more. The first is an interview that I did with Spike on January 20th, 2003. And it's just wonderful to have control and command of our own narrative, our own history. And James Curry, that's why what you have done and are doing is so important, so critical, because if we don't keep and preserve and elevate our story, it won't be kept at all. And scroll over to the little to the right a little bit, Cooper. I think I'm looking for a second headline, and scroll up a little bit. Scroll up. Right there, the second story was about go back up. It's a headline there, a giant migration of our own. This was an interview that story that we ran in 2013. 10 years later, and this was a speech that Leah Hargett, who was the president of the Minnesota Black Chamber of Commerce, gave, giving it to the West Broadway Business and Area Coalition during Black History Month. But this speech about the Great Migration spends time talking about Spike Moss's work and his vision and the struggle that we went through. So just wanted to go back to the top and see the cover again. It's just a great way to honor our own, and what we are doing, James Curry, is what you are doing. And we think that it's critical, essential. And I want to thank you and welcome your companionship, that's what I call it, in advancing and appreciation and preserving, elevating our story.
Yeah.
I'm going to hand this off and stick back to you, Brother Curry.
Yeah, no, that's a beautiful thing that you're doing. Thank you for doing that to Spike. Besides getting a street named after him, I think this is a brother that maybe some people even think is extroverted and exaggerating his stories, but the facts are there. I mean, he was on the ground at that place, maybe even forming these connections and coalitions before it was a thing, and through all, didn't just end it in the 70s like a lot of activists continued the fight. And you're so right about the historical erasure that the city engaged in, which dovetails nicely to this duplicity panel of I tried to highlight points in the narrative that are about betrayal and sort of treacherous attempts or just maligning in media of folks that you think are allies, turning on you, playing both ends against the middle, so to speak. And I think that occurred galore, not only with the Way, but with the American Indian movement. They were constantly attacking the Belcourt brothers, as well as Russell Means and Dennis Banks. So it's if people take anything away from this, I'd like them to see that there's a pattern and a strategy that you can then incorporate into your own progress or movement to anticipate and work around. Because, I mean, ultimately, there's always assassination and murder that can occur, but there's also steps that occur prior to that can be anticipated and avoided, or at least overcome. So yeah, and then I tried to end on a positive note about the legacy of it all. And there we got Brother Mahmoud, as well as, the Belcourt survived that their ordeal in the press, as well as occupation and incarceration. So, and then, like I said, it's just there's a lot of beautiful unity here. For some reason, the uniqueness of place of Minneapolis allowed for these highly segregated or hyper segregated communities of Black, brown, and red not to fight with each other, which was probably the goal, or the goal of somebody. But really, there was a formation of unity and solidarity and coalition, again, before it was a thing. I know with George Floyd and the global response showed us a multiracial sort of tapestry that came out for equality and for again about his and anger about his murder. But we had it 50 years prior in 66 and 67, and it continues on. I mean, it's still here, and it's just an underserved and underappreciated part of our history that I felt, again, that needed to be shared.
Can you bring your camera into the part of the New Way? So that's the building that I was talking about, where Spike Moss and the New Way, Mahmoud taught there. Bill Wilson, who became the first, I think, city council member, or one of the first Black city council members in St. Paul, taught there. Bill Wilson was also head of the St. Paul Urban League. I think Bobby Hickman and who else? Syl Davis and Gwen Jones Davis were principals in organizing the New Way. And the New Way was perceived as not only by us as a place for young people to get together, to play games, to do classroom, to do study of African history, Black history, and to develop, inside the urgency of the moment, under the tutelage of great teachers like Mahmoud Al-Qadi and others. And when that's the building that was torn down and a police station put there in its place. And I always felt that was an affront to the Black community. Mm-hmm. There has been conversation about returning that building, renaming that building, or turning that building over to the Way again. Mm-hmm. And putting the precinct somewhere like on West Broadway or further up in North Minneapolis. And I think there still is a need for a place for young people in North Minneapolis. And it would be justice, poetic justice, if somehow that building could be reimagined and reframed as a resource and deprisonized. I don't know, that's my own new word, I guess. Cleansed of the prison connection. There's no jailing going on there. It's an office, right? It's a headquarters, but you think police should think jail. But if you can figure out how to create something that's different from that and make it a community welcoming place, I think it'd be great. But go ahead, I'm pass it back to you, Brother Curry.
Oh, no, I agree. I had the fortune of running into Andrea Jenkins and saying, I think it would be poetic justice if the 3rd Street station in South Minneapolis became the way in a way to bookend history. Granted, I'd love the North Side to have that experience as well, but I also just like the symmetry of being able to take back the third precinct.
And why not do both? Why not do both?
Right?
Yeah, right. There's a need. Yeah.
If you want me to continue on,
please go ahead.
So I tried to mirror the national sort of context of which most people are familiar with, but wanted to highlight the women. It seems like in the 60s and 70s, they were enamored with Black leadership, but really we've got, let's see, wrong hand. We've got Elaine Brown leading the Panthers being, let's see, there we go, Elaine, heading the Panthers, taking over after Huey Newton, and as well as the majority of the Panthers being women, as well as, same thing with the American Indian movement. Besides the bell courts, there were women that were telling them as elders or as their wives or spouses what to do about strategy and organizing. What's wrong hand again? Some of us are familiar with the Chicago 8, which included Bobby Seale. Let's see who's up here. I think Josie's up there.
Josie Johnson.
Right behind you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I see.
But I could be wrong. It's weird. I'm looking at it from almost like a mirror. But it's I wanted to place the context of nationally what was happening. We're always used to hearing about the coasts and maybe Chicago. What was happening above Chicago in the upper Midwest in Minneapolis. All of this local history. So it mirrors what was happening nationally in case the youngsters didn't know. So I kind of made it more explicit or intentional, including, the occupation of Alcatraz which actually inspired the American Indian movement by Richard Oakes, and, Wounded Knee, which we've all heard about, but maybe don't know, Anna Mae Aquash, who was killed for being considered a double agent. We're familiar with sort of the Goodman, the three Goodman, Schwerner,
Cheney.
Were lost in Mississippi, but we may not know about Fred Hampton and his assassination by the Chicago police, or Medgar, or maybe we've never seen a photo of Patty Hearst, who was this heiress coming from the Hearst family that really was radicalized. Granted, she was kidnapped and indoctrinated, but also decided to join the fight, but then used her white privilege to get out of it at the end in court. So it's a mixed bag, but I wanted to show it in all of its nuance and complexity, and I hope it achieves that.
Very good.
Fascinating. Well, that's a good picture of the whole space there. That's wonderful to see.
Oh, good. Yeah, I did include some, Al referred to these earlier. This is kind of an elders area or activists area where I felt SoulForce is, the other part of SoulForce, I believed, was the sort of feeling that one gets when they visit the space of a loved one that's passed on, and you're doing a bit of a post-mortem of their space, and you're coming across materials and tastes that you didn't know that they had in literature or in music or in media. And in the room is a presence, may not be a life force, but it's a soul force. And it kind of triggers the movements of memory, because you're like, oh, I didn't know my dad read this book, or at least he had it in his collection. Or, it's always just interesting to realize that the shoulders that we're standing on, if there was a way that we could, and sometimes this happens on Ancestry, but you're finding out little tidbits or little phrases maybe that made their way into the paper, or of the times that, then become reflections of who that person was. It kind of denotes them in a personal way. And I thought I'd include things like music and the paraphernalia and literature from that era to just sort of, make the experience a little more immersive.
What gave you the idea to do this?
I think I've been circling around this idea for quite some time. I mean, as a product of an interracial marriage, I've got lineage that kind of crosses over, and it is what they now refer to as intersectionality. But I'm interested, and I've navigated those spaces all my life, whether it's being the sole person of color, the sole African American in a white space or environment, and what comes with that. And I think there's a radar. I think there's a skill set that one acquires just from that privilege or that segregation that heightens your awareness. And I think that spills into my work, looking at identity, trauma, race, and all of the complexity that it is being an African American. And then it closed with an epilogue here. Have we really changed? How have things changed, progress-wise or paradox-wise, in the 100 years since the Clayton McGee Jackson incident in Duluth? I did a little bit of a parallel here.
Talk about that. People might not know what that is.
Oh, sure. Well, that's the infamous lynching that occurred in Duluth in 1920, probably 100 years, or almost 100 years to the date of George Floyd's murder or asphyxiation. They both died through the lack of oxygen, whether it be a knee to the neck or a lynching rope. They're separated by 100 years. They're both Minnesota stories. There was also always they were both preceded by, in one case a mob, in the other a public mob, and the other law enforcement. There were allegations of, in the case of George Floyd, forfeiture or fraudulent use of dollars, and with the Clayton Jackson McGee, there was the allegation of rape. So this just asks, does police reform really work? All lives matter. The power of small radical change. You'll have to come in and see the rest in order to. Oh yeah, last but not least, shout out to some of the great artwork that was done. Political artwork, whether it was the Black Panther newspaper, their 10-point plan in comic book form, which is really great. The rhetoric that came out of the Black Power movement, it's all kind of interesting material that I felt was our work that stands on its own, including Puerto Rico, which Dr. Oliver mentioned.
Yeah.
We forget it. Should it have statehood? Of course it should have statehood. These are like no-brainers. I don't know why we don't think of Puerto Rico as a state of the U.S. instead of just being a
territory.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So they have debates about that themselves in the PR.
So come on down.
Well, it's 1256 Penn Avenue. What are the hours? And when can people, do you do groups or individuals, or how does it work?
Sure. It's Tuesday through Saturday, 1 to 5. On Saturdays, it's 10 to 2. So Tuesday through Friday, 1 to 5, Saturday, 10 to 2.
How can people support both the exhibit and the museum? Can they write a check or put the museum in their will? What can be done to support this critical work of memory, of preserving memory?
Sure. specific to the museum, I'm sure they wouldn't turn down a check or donations. There's always a donation jar. As far as keeping the exhibit alive, there's efforts on my part to make it a documentary, since that's really my métier, and am more comfortable with filmmaking than I am with exhibits. But there's also the idea of making this digital, having a repository, having it mobile, having it travel. So I guess I could benefit, or the exhibit could benefit from word of mouth, as well as elevation. If you come in and see it and really want to promote it in other platforms,
Post it and share it in your social media. Yeah.
all that, yeah. And I think even though it's hyper local, I think the uniqueness of our place, of our movements, and since the global spotlight's been put on Minneapolis, this is a nice counterpoint to how we've dealt with race. Have things changed? I mean, it's a complex question, and this is a component or a missing piece or connective tissue that sometimes isn't even on the radar.
James, when I was in South Africa, I met Ella Gandhi, is Mahatma Gandhi's granddaughter.
Then you know about SoulForce. That's got Gandhi in history, yeah.
Well, there was an Ojibwe leader that went to South Africa to help bless the location for the Gandhi Center.
Beautiful.
From Minnesota.
Beautiful.
And there was a challenge going on between some of the different cultures, some of the South African tribes and South Asian folk. And they brought the Ojibwe leader in to help negotiate some of that, and then to provide a blessing associated with it. So there's a location that marks what they did when coming in to try to support that.
Yeah, and if I can take back the talking stick, those are our brothers and sisters. I mean, shared oppression, shared oppressors, their land, our labor. It's a natural coalition. And I did have a smudge ceremony by my advisor, Valerie Martinez. So if any indigenous come in, they can use this sage that's here to smudge and bless the space in order to do ceremony.
How does it work? How does that work?
I wish I was an authority on smudging, and I certainly wouldn't.
Right.
Sort of. But it is. I mean, it is. It's about ancestry. The smoke travels up to the ancestors. The sage is holy. The red has significance. And then you're just inviting. It's really an invitation or convocation. But I don't want to reduce it at all.
Right.
So I'll just stop there.
Of course. That's respectful. I understand that. We got a few minutes left. I want to, as I started, talk about the Curry family, the Curry brand, and give me the Curry genealogy as you know it. Yeah.
Are you serious? Yeah.
Yes, I'm serious. Yeah.
I guess so. We hail from Harrisonburg, Virginia. There is a pocket of free slaves, there's a pocket of in Zenda near the Shenandoah Valley, evidently, that historians are fascinated because there was ownership of land. There was a great great grandfather of mine that owned a church called Dungeons Chapel. His daughter was raped by the slave owner. The slave owner then, or we're not even sure if he was the slave owner, but he gave the offspring her name. She's my great grandma. James Dabney and this my great grandma Ella Phoebe made their way to Hastings. There was an aunt that wasn't the sister of the raped daughter. Lived here with the Wallaces, with John Wallace. So Hastings, there was a joining of the colored regiment. This is Civil War and pre-Reconstruction, so there's this obviously a pre-Great Migration move to the north, whether it be Underground Railroad conductors along the Mississippi, or just the idea of becoming contraband of a unit or a regiment, a colored regiment from the north, and then finding your way to the north through that military service. So that's kind of what occurred. And then after the Exodus and a church burning in Hastings, which the Wallaces and Currys founded, an AME church, and you can read about that if you want on Minipedia. They found their way to South Minneapolis, 38, 36, 50 Avenue. So that, the Nakarima and Dreamland, and sort of the heart, the cultural corridor of Black South Minneapolis.
No, I didn't know Dreamland. I knew the Nakarima. I used to go there.
Oh, okay.
But Dreamland I hadn't heard of. Tell me about that. Tell me more about it.
Well, you've heard of Brother Cassius, Brutus Cassius, correct?
Certainly, yeah.
I believe he was the proprietor.
Okay.
Maybe alongside, while he had that Cassius bar, he had this nightclub, actually more of an interracial nightclub, which is where my Wyzetta, where actually I think my mom was going to West in Uptown by Bidet Makaska. But anyways, there was a lot of interracial action and multiracial interaction at that nightclub. I'm sure the police weren't cool.
So Dreamland was in South Minneapolis?
Yeah, on the corner of 4th and 36th.
4th and 36th.
It's the mosque it was a mosque briefly.
Mm-hmm.
I think its frame is still there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And obviously I knew Cassius's bar downtown. That's the one when I got here. That was the place that was like the best hamburgers in town. And all of the players hung out and they had kind of after hours business. And I associate the Cassius bar, that the winding up of that is the downtown presence with the opening of the Cozy Bar and the other bars in North Minneapolis, like the Blue Note, I think it was Blue Note, the Cozy, and there was one or two others.
There was also the Waikiki room, if I can interrupt. There was the Waikiki room where they went around and took pictures. I think it was a Radisson. It was sort of a Polynesian, even though it was Polynesian themed.
Was that in St. Paul?
Maybe it was.
I think
it's prior to my era. But for some reason, I thought I saw remnants of it downtown
in Minneapolis.
Yeah,
could have been. Okay. Interesting. Well, it's fascinating to go over.
The next exhibit should be devoted to entertainment spaces for our people.
And how they have really disappeared.
Yeah.
Right. And you'd be surprised.
More erasure, just like you were speaking about the precinct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, Brother Oliver, thoughts, questions?
Yeah, I'm reflecting on what was going on in the Twin Cities, but also reflecting on the similar history in Detroit. And also, I keep thinking about places that they tore up, and they tore up some places in the city of Detroit too. Build a freeway to go through Black communities, and to sort of tear up places that were important to people in Black and places where people used to hang out. When I was a kid, you'd go to different places. There's a place in Detroit called the 20 Grand, or that was there called the 20 Grand. That's where people would go for. They were for my older brothers and sisters, but and places where they go skating.
Yep.
The Arcadia was a place in Detroit where they do that, and then I took my son there, but you go to Motown. Motown was on East Grand Boulevard, and you get a chance to see the different performers out on the lawn, but it was a house. And then they
Lucky
bought
you.
two
Yeah.
Well, let me close. We're at the end of the hour with this. Let me invite people to come and enjoy, to learn, and visit the museum, Minnesota African American History Museum. Is that the proper name?
Heritage
Heritage
Museum
Museum.
and
Okay,
Gallery.
Minnesota African American Heritage Museum and Gallery. Thank you. And thank you
bet.
for putting that up. And here's a special invitation now. What's happening on Plymouth Avenue, right in the parking lot just east of your building? That's the Urok building, and that's between your building and the 4th Precinct. That's where the staging will be for the celebration of the renaming of Plymouth Avenue to Spike Moss Way. That's going to be Tuesday. The actual ceremony starts at 11 o'clock, and but people should come early because there'll be limited seating. It's going to be hot, summertime, but show up. But you should plan to come and take either, I'm not sure what time the museum opens up, but
One.
at 1 o'clock. Well, after you do the ceremony, go up and visit the museum. That's what you need to do. Get up there, see it, sign up, let them know that you were there, and support the museum. Leave some money in the donation or make a commitment to support them going forward. James, thank you so much for this wonderful time with you in that exhibit. Thank you for the work you're doing. And
Thank you.
Dr. Williams, as always, thank you for leadership and guidance and the voice that you bring to this program.
Thank you. My pleasure.
I'm Al McFarlane. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.